All right, Moses intercedes for the people. After 40 days on the mountain, God tells Moses, go down, for your people, whom you brought out of the land of Egypt, have corrupted themselves. I think at this moment, God sounds like a couple fighting over a misbehaving kid. Oh, he's your kid now. But on a very serious level, Israel has rejected God as their God. And so he has rejected them as his people. The covenant is broken, completely broken. God tells Moses, this is a stiff-necked people. What does that mean? We get that image a lot in the Bible. What do you think stiff-necked people means? Stubborn. Yeah, the image is that of a work animal, like an ox that won't bow to the yoke, that won't let itself be hooked to a plow, like an animal that refuses to be domesticated, tamed, and led. God makes an offer to Moses. He says, I will destroy this people and make you a great nation. God offers to make Moses a new Abraham and start over. Technically, he'd still be keeping his promise to make a great nation from Abraham to lead the people into the promised land. But, wow. Now think about this. Why does God say this? God knows he's not going to destroy Israel. Why does he make the offer?
A test.
Huh?
A test.
It's a test. He wants to give Moses the opportunity to intercede for his people. He wants to give Moses the opportunity to have that heart of compassion. Because remember, Moses he's had it up to here with the Israelites, who have been complaining and threatening and making his life miserable for the last 3 months. And God is giving him the chance to remember that he loves them and that he does want what's best for them. So Moses begins to plead for them. Oh God, these are your people. You've done so much for them. We can't quit now. Moses also defends the glory of God, saying, if you let Israel die in the wilderness, what would the Egyptians say? Oh, their God didn't have the power to save them after all. That's not right. So for the sake of God's glory and for the sake of his people, Moses' head is back in the game. As Moses comes down the mountain, carrying the 10 Commandments, talking with Joshua, poor Joshua waiting up there for 40 days. Joshua says, there is a noise of war in the camp. And Moses says, it is not the sound of shouting for victory or the sound of the cry of defeat, but the sound of singing that I hear. Then they come around the corner and see the whole orgy for themselves. Moses is furious. He takes the 10 Commandments and in a vivid display, perfectly captured in the movie, throws the tablets down to the foot of the mountain, breaking them. We know Moses has a hot temper, but in this case, those broken tablets tell the people the truth. This is what you've done to the covenant with God. Moses then burns the golden calf with fire, grinds it down to powder, adds it to water, and makes the people drink it. Nobody stops him. Nobody tries to stop him. And this bitter drink is very much like the bitter drink they would give to women suspected of adultery. A little note buried deep in the law. But the message is clear. God is the divine husband of Israel, and you have cheated on him. Then Moses confronts Aaron. What did the people do to you that you led them in this great sin? Moses knows this wasn't Aaron's idea, but he's saying, how could you let this happen? Aaron is completely flustered. You know the people are set on evil. They said, make us gods. And they gave me their gold, and I threw it into the fire, and then out came this calf. Nice try, Aaron. Even with the calf destroyed, order in the camp was still not restored. The text says the people had broken loose. Think violence and rioting. Think complete anarchy. Moses imposes order with the sword. Everyone who is on the Lord's side, he calls out, come to me. Only the tribe of Levi, his own tribe, comes. Moses tells him to strike down those who continue to rebel, and they do. 3,000 die that day before the people give up the rebellion. And Moses tells the Levites that because they chose God when it mattered most, they have ordained themselves, and they are now set aside for ministry. From that point forward, the Levites became, so to speak, the deacons of ancient Israel. They were not responsible for the sacrifices. That was the priest's job. But the Levites were responsible for taking care of the tabernacle, serving the people, teaching them, and helping lead them in worship. Back at the end of Genesis, for those of you that were in that class, the sons of Levi were in essence cursed, told they would never inherit the land because they were violent and had committed the massacre at Shechem. This is one of those ironic places where God uses them in their weakness and turns their evil into good. The Levites help restore order. They become ordained. And the reason they never do get any land of their own is because they will be spread out throughout the land of Israel, serving everywhere in ministry. All right, that's the day of the golden calf. The next day, Moses prays and once again makes intercession for the Israelites. He longs to restore their relationship with God. He knows that the penalty for the broken covenant is death, and he offers his own life in exchange for theirs. Remember that this covenant was sealed in blood. Moses prays, "If you will, forgive their sin, and if not, blot me out of the book you have written." God knows that Moses' life is not going to be enough to make atonement for the sins of the world. That's going to be Jesus' job. So God declines the offer and says that each man will be held responsible for his own actions when the time of judgment comes. But then God makes another offer. "Moses, go and bring the people into the promised land. I will send my angel to go before you. I will drive out your enemies. But I myself will not go with you." That's an interesting question. What do the people really want? Do they just want God to do good things for them? Or do they want God? Last time God checked, they didn't want him. They said they never wanted to hear his voice again. What about us? Do we just want good things from God? Do we pray for an easy life? I mean, granted, we all pray, "Lead us not into temptation, deliver us from speed bumps."
Potholes too.
Potholes.
Yeah.
And yet, an easy life can never be the goal of our life. Do we want a relationship with God? A real relationship with the creator of the universe, with all the amazing blessings and crazy trials that entails? When the people hear God's offer that he will allow them to go into the promised land, but will not go with them, they mourn. They remove their jewelry as a sign of penance. Why their jewelry? Well, it was their gold jewelry that had created the gold calf in the first place, and probably much of their jewelry had Egyptian religious imagery on it. It's a small gesture, but it means something. The people are signifying to God, "We want to repair our relationship with you. Show us how. What's next?" Moses finds a new way to meet with God. It's easier for an 80-year-old man than walking up and down the mountain all the time. He pitches a tent outside of camp and calls it the tent of meeting. It's a kind of proto-tabernacle, a holy place where God meets with his people. All are welcome. Anyone seeking the Lord can come and pray. And when Moses comes and prays, the pillar of cloud visibly descends upon the tent. The Lord speaks face to face with Moses there, as a man speaks to a friend. And when the people see the cloud descend upon the tent of meeting, they all marvel, they all go to the doors of their own tents, and they all stand there and worship God. Moses' example of faithfulness helps lead the people back to God. And when Moses returns to camp, Joshua does not depart from the tent. Think about Joshua for a moment. Joshua has witnessed all these mighty acts of God for Moses' side. He participated in the miraculous victory against the Amalekites, and he even stayed those 40 days and nights on Mount Sinai. But Joshua doesn't just want to see the mighty acts of God, or even be a part of the mighty acts of God. He wants to hear God's voice for himself. So Joshua remains in the tent of meeting after Moses leaves. Joshua encounters God, not just secondhand by being around Moses, but directly. And what does God say to Joshua? I expect it was something along the lines of, "Be strong and of good courage, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go." Just a few months later, Joshua is going to have his major test of faith. We'll hear about that in the next class. He's going to be ready. Any thoughts on the tent of meeting? Yeah, I call it the proto-tabernacle in here. It's very informal, but it's a building Moses sets up where he and anyone else that cares to come can go and meet with God. And it's only up for a few months, maybe, before the tabernacle. It's in the tent of meeting that Moses intercedes for the people a third time. It's a thrilling dialogue. Moses begs God to stay with them on their journey, and he speaks with God in a deeply personal way. I want to read it out loud. Chapter 33. Moses said to the Lord, "See, you say to me, 'Bring up this people,' but you have not let me know whom you will send with me. Yet you have said, 'I know you by name,' and you have also found favor in my sight. Now therefore, I beg you, if I have found favor in your sight, show me now your ways, that I may know you and find favor in your sight. Consider too that this nation is your people." And God said, "My presence will go with you, and I will give you rest." And he said to him, "If your presence will not go with me, do not carry us up from here. For how shall it be known that I have found favor in your sight, I and your people? Is it not in your going with us, so that we are distinct, I and your people, from all other people that are on the face of the earth?" And the Lord said to Moses, "This very thing that you have spoken, I will do, for you have found favor in my sight, and I know you by name." Moses said, "I beg you, show me your glory." And God said, "I will make all my goodness pass before you." I'll stop there. Moses experienced God on the mountain in a way no one ever had before. And yet, he senses he hasn't seen anything yet. There is so much more of God to know. There is always so much more of God to know. And the more a person knows God, the more a person longs to know God. Moses experiences God's mercy towards Israel, and his response is, "Who are you? I want more of you." Have any of you ever considered God's line in there, "My presence will go with you, and I will give you rest"? It's a very good line for personal meditation. Have any of you ever prayed, "Show me your glory"? Consider it. If you dare. One of the great things about Moses and so many other of God's people in the Bible is that they reach a place where they can come before God in confidence. And God urges his people to come before him in holy confidence. And for us, who have the gates of heaven to open for us by Jesus Christ, all the more so. Do not be afraid to pray with holy confidence. Do not be afraid to ask for more of God. And see what he does. God says he will show Moses his glory. He says, "I will place you in the cleft of the rock and cover you with my hand. I will pass by in all my glory, but you will only see my back." Often we too can only see God's glory, goodness, and grace in the rearview mirror. We may not know what God is doing with us right now, but so often we can look back and go, "Hey, God had a plan that whole time," and we can see his work. This leaves us with a question. God tells Moses, "You cannot see my face, for man shall not see me and live." But just 2 paragraphs ago, Moses and God were speaking face to face in the tent of meeting. How does that work? Plenty of people in the Bible and afterwards have had visionary experiences of God, but they're always partial and incomplete. They're not the full beatific vision. God is saying to Moses here, it is not possible for you to have a direct, unfiltered experience of everything I am. Not this side of heaven. But I will show you everything you can bear. So the next morning, as per God's instructions, Moses cuts 2 fresh tablets of stone and goes up the mountain. And God passes by in all his glory, proclaiming, the Lord, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger and abounding in mercy and faithfulness, keeping merciful love for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, but who will by no means clear the guilty. It is worth pointing out that ever since Jesus came, we as human beings now do have a sure way to look upon the face of God. Like you mentioned, we now have the image of the invisible God. In Jesus, God takes on humanity so we can see him and live. So that we can see God and understand him to the utmost of our human capacity. When Moses experiences God and hears him proclaim his mercy, he worships God. And then he once more pleads that God take Israel back as his people. And God does. Behold, I make a covenant, and I will do such marvels as have not been wrought on the earth. The covenant is restored. Moses spends another 40 days and 40 nights on the mountain with God, and he comes down with a brand new shiny set of the 10 Commandments. And that's not all that's shiny. When he comes down, he has had such an intense experience with God that the skin of his face shines with God's glory. This foreshadows the transfiguration of Christ, where Jesus shines with the full glory of God, and Moses once again meets with God on a mountaintop. When Moses comes down off the mountain, he doesn't know his face is radiant, but the people are afraid to go near him. All right, one little bit of trivia. This passage, where Moses comes down off the mountain, contains the most famous mistranslation in the Latin Vulgate Bible that was written, for the most part, extremely well by St. Jerome around 400 AD. I guess the word keren is shine and keren is horn, but if you don't put in vowels, it's the same set of consonants. And so the Latin Vulgate reads not, his face shone, but his face had horns. Oh. Thanks to that typo, every painting or statue of Moses between about 400 AD and 1600 AD shows him with horns. You can look up like Michelangelo's famous statue of Moses. He's got horns. Oh, poor Moses. Moses begins to wear a veil on his face, except when he's giving or receiving revelation from God. St. Paul has an interesting allegorical interpretation of Moses' veil. He says that Moses wore the veil so that people wouldn't see this temporary glory fade away. He says that, like Moses' shining face, the glory of the Sinai covenant was ultimately destined to fade away. But the glory of God in Jesus Christ remains forever. St. Paul, this is a passage in 2 Corinthians chapter 3, and St. Paul finishes it by saying, but we all, with unveiled face, beholding as in a mirror the glory of the Lord, are being transformed into his image, from glory to glory, by the Holy Spirit.